So this is our presentation about Ethics and Religion, Chapter 11 of Consilience by Drew Ramaswamy.
James Shields.
And Gabe Perez.
So before we start, I just want to say a large portion of this chapter is rooted in the comparison between two groups of people, the Transcendentalists and the Empiricists. And it's a reoccurring theme, and we're going to start with the foundation and get more and more specific to teach the concept effectively. So before we're able to discuss the origins of ethics, which is the main difference between transcendentalism and empiricism thought, we have to discuss the implications of what the origins of ethics brings towards society. So morals can shape how we see ourselves and also determine how important religion is in our society, as well as the importance of natural sciences. So understanding where morals comes from is really important. And that's a debate between the transcendentalist people and the empiricist people. So now we can talk about the ethics and its origin directly. Wilson claims there are two major, very different definitions of the origins of ethics. And one may think, by popular belief, that these two sections are religious people and atheists. And this is not the case. These people are actually transcendentalists and empiricists. And transcendentalists believe that the origins of moral guidelines exist outside of human mind. So some sort of deity or nature made it. So this is the category that the religious fall into. However, this group takes into account people who do not believe in a god or a supreme being. They just take in people that believe that ethics exists outside of humanity or a natural law. Empiricists, on the other hand, believe that humans create morals, not some deity or figure or nature, and we obtain morals through our own senses and our own experiences. So that's the key difference between the two. And one may notice that there is a key consistency between the two groups, and this is religion. And religion may not apply sometimes, but it can and it does in certain situations. So while they may not share all aspects of religion with each other, religious beliefs between the two are not as different as one may think. For example, one can be a transcendentalist but not believe God is the creator of this, so they can be atheists. And likewise, one can be empiricist, but can believe that God exists, just it doesn't influence the origin of ethics. So empiricists can be religious and transcendentalists can be atheists. Also, the implications that they believe in is a major consistency in the two as well, which is how important they feel the topic of ethical origin is, and they believe it's really important to society. So now that we have laid out a basic foundation for the definitions, we can go to the specific aspects of the empiricist and transcendentalist perspectives. Let's start with the empiricist perspective. The author believes that we should take this viewpoint more seriously, mainly because he is an empiricist personally. The empiricist viewpoint consists of multiple main topics surrounding it. These main topics are biological roots, cultural success, code of principles, and objective knowledge. And we will look at each of these in more detail individually, starting with the code of principles. This idea is driven by hereditary prepositions in mental development. This is also known as the ideas that were expressed by the scholars of the Enlightenment, where the scholars attempted to find the universal truth and focus on the people instead of God. Through this search, certain codes of principles and ethics were created among cultures and developed, showing how humans created moral standards. So we start with hereditary prepositions, with the addition of Enlightenment ideals and the addition of searching for a universal truth, and we end up with moral codes and principles. So this leads to the next point about how the success of the moral codes in cultures and how these codes can define certain cultural success. Cultural success is a step-by-step process, which again roots from historical circumstance and Enlightenment ideals, and it also defines what we consider as good or evil. That's what moral codes is, just defining what's good and evil. And these factors define if a culture is successful or in decline in a very objective manner. So we start off with, it's basically a circle. We start off with historical circumstance. We go to Enlightenment ideals. We go to these create ethical codes, and eventually these ethical codes bleed into cultures. And the ethical codes that bleed into the cultures will define whether the culture succeeds or not. And whether they succeed or not, they will create a new historical circumstance, and the cycle repeats itself. And You may notice that this is a very objective way of defining if a culture is successful or not, and this subjective manner of thinking is a repeated pattern in empirist thought. So the objective knowledge which ties into the natural sciences and the logical aspects of life. This is the main and arguably most important aspect of empirist thought, because it shows how they attempt to find certain truth through scientific means, and this displays how they believe morals is not just some abstract concept created by a deity like transcendentalists do. It's more down to earth in a way, and it really shows why empiricists believe that humans are the creator of morals. A main tool of objectivity that empiricists use, as described before, is biology and the natural sciences and the understanding of systems. There's a certain connection to the natural sciences with the roots of moral behavior. The reason for this is because explaining our origins and understanding ourselves as humans through the natural sciences helps understand the deeper processes of human nature and morals, thus showing how science and therefore humans created morals, because the science is able to outline the deeper processes that define humans. Now, let's go on to the other perspective, the transcendentalist viewpoint. Transcendentalists, on the other hand, believe in something greater, whether it be God or nature or any other deity. They reject scientific methods, as they don't believe it fully and effectively describes the intricacies of the human mind and human morals. Theist transcendentalists and non-religious transcendentalists all believe that science restricts us down to the material world, while connections with God and nature allow us to see truly within humans and help us find our morals. So a hierarchy is created where God and nature sits up top and is a creator of these ethics, while man and science are simply in the material world. So transcendentalists believe in this hierarchy of thought, and they believe that science cannot describe the deeper processes that define humans, such as morals, like the empiricists do. Transcendentalists repeatedly attack the inconsistencies in science and how science changes often, while praising the beauty of God. We talk of this hierarchy that transcendentalists pose, but there is one transcendentalist concept that someone contradicts this hierarchy. This is secular transcendentalism. This term was coined by Immanuel Kant, believing each person has their own set of morals, not bestowing a moral faith to a certain being or idealism. He believes that humans are independent of creation of morals, so we indirectly create moral standards, and we indirectly create moral choices. So this relates to the idea that people are self-reliant, and this relates to that, and that's a very core transcendentalist concept, that humans are reliant. But this also contradicts the transcendentalist concept, because this shows that humans create moral choice, not God. So as a transcendentalist, this is out of the ordinary, because it shows that humans can dictate nature, not only God. Because as you can see here, each individual human has a moral choice, and those moral choices all affect nature overall. So in the outcome, at the end of the outcome, nature is changed. This shows a display of some sort of human control in transcendentalism, which directly relates to how important human control is in the ought-is paradox.
The ought-is paradox happens when the belief is made that since things happen in a specific way, they have to be that way from now on. This paradox was brought about by philosopher David Hume, who was looked up to by both the author Edward Wilson and Immanuel Kant. This graphic organizer explains the paradox well, as the main difference between what is and what ought to be is people's opinion on the subject at hand. The ought-is paradox is what differentiates the truth versus what happened. So now that we have looked at a specific aspect of transcendentalism, we can look at the individual aspects of transcendentalism. So there are certain individualistic aspects of transcendentalism. This quote by the author, there is a supreme principle, either divine or intrinstic, in the order of nature, and we will be wise to learn about it and find the means to conform to it. So transcendentalism is basic religion in the fact that one finds purpose in life by researching and learning about a being who they base all decisions on and follow that being. So this form of transcendentalism differed greatly from the thoughts of empirists. So the author, Wilson, also wrote that there is a strong innate feeling and historical experience that cause certain actions to be preferred. We have experienced them and weighed their consequences, and agree to conform with codes that express them. Let us take an oath upon the codes and invest our personal honor in them, and suffer punishment for their violation. So empirists take a more individualistic view on things, as they believe each person is responsible for their own morals. These people can base their individual morals based on past things that have happened, or just based on what they think is right. These morals they see are based on a moral code, which keeps society held together. So the modern moral codes are codes put into place by societies or large groups in general that are in general very disorganized and will lead to chaos. This is mostly due to the fact that many clashing moral guides would clash and lead to a massive unsatisfied people. This is mostly because of the fact that people have different desires in life, and each person cannot be satisfied at the same time. So religion has a great impact on these moral codes and has a specific life cycle.
Wilson argues that the same train of thought that aligns ethical philosophy with science can impact the way that we study religion. According to Wilson, religions have a certain timeline that they follow in their quote-unquote lives. First, the religion is born. Then, it develops. Third, it competes with other religions. And then fourth, it spreads until finally, fifth, it dies. These stages of quote-unquote life of religion reflect their human creators, just like how humans need certain things, so does religion. The roots of religion and moral reasoning could be very similar and or identical. There is evidence to suggest that religious rites and rituals were first being performed in Europe and the Middle East during the Paleolithic era, but using theoretical deduction as well as suggesting evidence, primitive elements of moral behavior are far older than those rites and rituals. Instead, religion arose on ethical basis as a means to legitimize or justify moral codes. Another way that religions arose was out of fear and of emotions in general. Wilson argues that these things in particular necessitated religion in humanity. First, the survival instinct of humanity. The conscious minds of humans tell themselves to stay alive. As a result, people seek the ability to obtain eternal life, even if in spirit. In other words, just to stay alive in general, no matter what form. These next two go together. The understanding of and control over life. Humans seek to extract or derive the mysteries of the material world. To explain those mysteries, mythic narratives are spun of tribal history. That is, stories that align with their certain religion are made to go along with life. Then thirdly or fourthly, if you put the understanding and control together, tribalism. Humans seek to be a part of something bigger than themselves, which can be satisfied in religion. If a religious mythos, that is, the story, did not exist in a culture, it would be invented. That theory has been supported thousands of times throughout history. This history is inevitable and is the mark of an instinctive creature, with humans being that creature in this case. The logic that ethics come about by genetic evolution applies to religious behaviors, argues Wilson. When people subordinate themselves or put their lives in jeopardy similar to martyrdom, their genes are more likely to get transferred to the next generation than people of a group that does not have that same sort of trust or faith. The mathematical models support this. If the curtailment of survival and reproduction of individuals due to genes for altruism, ethics, morals, those genes will rise in frequency. If empiricism is upheld by the sciences, consilience is upheld. If transcendentalism is proven, the argument for consilience would weaken because the gap between the sciences and the humanities would divide the two further than before. Behavioral scientists from another planet would notice immediately the semiotic resemblance between animal submissive behavior on the one hand and human obeisance to religious and civil authority on the other. They would point out that the most elaborate rites of the obeisance are directed at the gods, the hyperdominant, if invisible, members of the human group, and they would conclude, correctly, that in baseline social behavior, not just in anatomy, Homo sapiens has only recently diverged in evolution from a non-human primate stock. Comes from what Wilson considers to be the main point of his argument here, that humans, no matter what they believe about their thinking, it is just another way of thinking that has been so evident in animals over the years, that really human thinking is not complex. It is simplistic, similar to different animals. It is simplistic in that it rejects the objective truth of science in favor of romanticized stories, that is, religion. Now, transcendentalism and its way of life is a lot to try to take in for normal people, especially when you consider that transcendentalism wins the heart while empiricism wins the mind. That is to say, the transcendentalism, the sort of upper being, the separate being of the transcendentalist worldview, captures the heart because it's so romanticized. It is such an epic story. Whereas the empiricism view states that there is no other being, that it is all just made up. It's cold. There's not much hope there. Now, Wilson believes that theology tries to resolve the dispute or dilemma between religion and science by making religion more and more abstract in order to legitimize it. For instance, the Egyptians made their gods be Egyptian, the Greeks made their gods be Greek. The Hebrews consolidated all those gods into one individual God who became so abstract that it seemed like he was being hidden. They denied that truth in a way. This shows that how humans always wish to be right, and how human nature of these groups leads towards human denial of objective truth. On the other hand, Wilson believes that the religious view of ethics and religion and the secular view of ethics and religion cannot be reconciled to each other. The objective truth is either one of the two, Wilson argues, or it is some form where the two are combined. His personal belief is that later, in order for objective truth to be found, religion must become so secularized that it must be in agreement with science. That is, it must stop denying the supposed objective truth that science brings.
So the lenses discussed in this section is obviously an ethical lens was discussed because we are attempting to find the most effective way to describe where ethics come from, ethical origin. A philosophical lens is repeatedly mentioned in the chapter. This is because of how many questions on the origins of morals brings about the ideas and thoughts of what access the human mind, and in general what aspects allow us to see within ourselves. Philosophy. For example, transcendentalists believe that God is the only thing we can use to see the internal nature of ourselves. So God created moral laws. On the other hand, empiricists believe that natural sciences are able to do this, which means man created moral laws. It really displays a lens on which we can see ourselves based on morals, and we see ourselves internally based on either science or religion. How we see ourselves is easily related to philosophy. It displays a cultural and social lens as well. A cultural lens is described when the author speaks about cultural success and what makes a culture decline. Recall that timeline graph. Ideas of moral codes and its origin, as well as the ideas of the Enlightenment, was connected to a culture's performance in an objective manner, which was a very interesting take. A historical lens is also described in this way because of the connection between Enlightenment and moral codes, as well as because it is a part of a progress graph for the success of cultures, if you remember that. A social lens is discussed in that the implications of the definition of a moral origin is repeatedly brought up and is stressed to a great extent by the author. The implications would represent what a society would look like, and the specific characteristics of the implications, like religion, natural sciences, and philosophy, and how we see ourselves. A scientific lens is discussed mainly through the form of debate between empiricists and transcendentalists. Through the scientific process and the natural sciences, empiricists concluded that science helps us understand the nuances of human, thus the human is the creator of morals. Transcendentalists reject this process of science, claiming that there are many inconsistencies in the scientific process. Now I'll switch over to the lenses, not this. An important lens discussed is the futuristic lens, in that Wilson considers what the future holds for the disparity between religions and secularism and what it really means for humanity. Truth has been claimed by most sides, but no side has been proved infallibly correct. No objective truth has been found. Wilson, as already mentioned, proposes that either the objective truth is one of the two or a combination of both. His personal belief is that religion will become increasingly secularized to a point where the two ideologies, religion and secularism, agree. So, moving on to the lenses not discussed, there is an economic lens. There is no mention on the implications on the economy that morals and religion could cause. There was also no mention of a political lens in this reading. However, if we were to connect the two ideas of morals and religion to both an economic and political lens, we can look at the two lenses in a similar way. With economics, we can observe the impact of a transcendentalist religious perspective or an empiricist enlightened perspective on the economy and determine which form is more effective for the economy. So we can compare the two and determine the more effective outcome. With politics, we can do the same. We could observe the impact of two thought processes. But now we observe which one will create more polarization in politics and which one creates more unity. So we can determine the best option, transcendentalism or empiricism. The environmental lens was also not discussed, and he could have easily expanded on this topic if he discussed the natural sciences more. So you may be asking how this relates to the idea of consilience. Discourse on the origins of ethics brings together competing ideas between the sciences and practicality, as well as ideas of philosophy, society, culture, and religion. One may associate the science and practicality section to empiricism, because that's their main point, and one may associate the philosophical aspect to transcendentalism. This is true, but it's also not the entire story. Each definition of the origins of ethics has its aspects of philosophy and society and the sciences within itself. For example, the definition by empiricists accounts for both sciences in the scientific process, as well as philosophy, as we try to find the most effective way to access the internal nuances of humans and morals. So consilience is quote unquote occurring within the definitions itself, not just the debates between the definitions that are occurring. So our empiricist contains consilience because it discusses philosophy and it discusses science. And argument 2, transcendentalist, includes consilience because it also discusses sciences and it also discusses philosophy. And the conflict and debate between the two includes consilience as well because obviously they're combining ideas. They're science and philosophy, society. So the broad truth that Wilson exposes is the fact that consilience does not have to be facilitated by cooperation between ideas, but it can also be facilitated because of debate and disagreement. The two items that are disagreeing have their own aspects of consilience, as described before.
And here are our sources, and that concludes chapter 11 of Consilience.